Ooh, I'm live. I'll just fiddle around while I'm waiting for listeners to wander into the chat room. Oh, dropped my thingy. Um, I'm waiting for the tea kettle to call me so I can make a cup of instant coffee. It's Thursday morning, about 8:30 here. The weather service says it's 55 degrees, but the thermometer on my wall says it's 45. That's Fahrenheit. Let's see what that is centigrade while I fiddle around, giving people a chance to wander in. It is, oh, here we go. 7.22 centigrade. I have the heater blasting and it's still 45 in this house. Um, that blue thing's bothering me. It's the window. It opens in. Ah, here we go. The cat likes it open. It isn't open to the outside. It's a kind of a greenhouse window, so there's still um, closed window outside the open one, and it has become a cat window where Tora likes to watch the wildlife from her safe perch. I can hear the tea kettle kind of rumbling, but it isn't whistling yet. I still have some tea. Mm. I start the morning with water and tea and coffee, but I had to dump out my first cup of coffee because it had cat hair in it. I keep trying to tell Tora that coffee's bad for her. Okay, now it's whistling. I'll be right back with my coffee. Big church organs. Okay, coffee. I've had trouble waking up this morning, so I came to YouTube and listened to a few minutes of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. If you've seen horror movies, especially the old ones, you have heard that music. I could see Dracula coming down the long, sweeping staircase while listening to the church organ playing Bach Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Okay, well, I see I have one listener who's being very patient. I've given up on both Saturdays and Sundays. YouTube just cuts me off too much. I should have brushed my hair. Well, anyway, I have cowlicks. I have several of them, two in front and one in back, and two more somewhere. Anyway, um, YouTube just won't give me a stable connection on the weekends. They're overwhelmed with live podcasts on the weekends, especially now that churches have to do everything online. Things are beginning to open up. Supposedly, a church can have services with 10 people or fewer. Well, some of these bigger churches can seat 300 or more. Why only 10 for them? They could have at least 100 with social distancing and masks. Masks are now recommended here, not required, but most of us do wear them. The mask won't help me, but if I'm contagious with anything, not just COVID, but anything, it will protect others, at least a little bit. So why not? Makes people feel good. But I'm just terribly concerned that the media have hyped this so much. They've frightened people. And now our fearless leaders want to keep this lockdown going until it's safe. Well, there's really no such thing as safety. Unless you're dead, nothing can hurt you then. Well, your soul, of course, but that's another matter. Stuff happens. Even if you don't get COVID or the flu or whatever. I have friends who are dealing with cancer. Now, I have a little skin cancer here, but it's no big deal. It's barely worse than a wart. And it's getting smaller because some time ago I figured out while it was growing and getting bigger that it seemed to be more infection than tissue. So I tried various antiseptics. I tried hydrogen peroxide, the solution you get for household first aid. And I tried the little tubes of antibiotics like bacitracin, and they were somewhat helpful, but what really is making it shrink is iodine. Now, at first I was using the tincture that's in alcohol, and it stings. So I got a solution that does not contain alcohol. Sometimes it's called betadine, but I learned that that's a brand name, and you can get the store brand of the same thing much cheaper. Let's see, betadine looks like betadine, but every veterinarian and doctor I've ever talked to called it betadine. Anyway, it's iodine in an aqueous solution, water. It doesn't sting. And this thing that was from the middle of my upper lip all the way up to here is now just a little blob right here. I have scar tissue all over the place. But, oh, and the one on my arm where I had that polio vaccination decades ago, it's gone entirely. There's nothing but scar tissue. And it worried me more. You see, this is basal cell carcinoma. The one on my arm was a squamous cell. Yes, I had doctors do biopsies. It was a squamous cell, which is more serious. It's gone completely. Just put iodine on it every day. So I have a feeling that the people who associate cancers with viruses just might be onto something. Just could be. I didn't have it surgically removed because they wanted to take half my nose with it. And at the time, I was not covered for plastic surgery to fix my nose when they were done. Now I could get qualified for that, but there's this thing called copay and another thing called deductible. And I don't have $700, but I do have a bottle of iodine. And I'm betting that even this little bump here is going to go away. I I can't recommend that you try this at home. I'm not a doctor. I did study pre-medicine for a couple of years, but um, I just couldn't. I had to accept that I could never go to medical school as a single parent. Some people can, I could not. And I have a very wonderful adult son. And the older my granddaughter gets, the wiser and more beautiful he thinks I am. As you can see, I've got a new background. I just turned the desk around so you can see two of my bookcases. I have more. Boy, do I have more. You know, on top of my dresser where it's long and low, where most women put their makeup and their jewelry, I have books. Lots and lots of books. Um, okay, I've been musing about this shutdown and all the people arrested for not wearing a mask, hairdressers fined for cutting people's hair. Uh, I'd like to get my hair done. It's grown quite a lot. Um, all kinds of people getting kicked out of Costco for not wearing a mask, and restrictions on how many can go in the store at one time. Our leaders don't trust us to use common sense. And yes, there's always someone who either has no common sense or chooses not to use it. But that's no reason to shut us all down. They are the minority. It's really nonsensical to make all these laws for people who are different. No two people are alike, and I'm not a 6 year old or a 20-year old. I have to be careful. My lungs are compromised. They tell me it's from smoking, but let's see. I smoked for, let's see, 40. I smoked for some 50 years. Well, okay, 40 years before I got these symptoms. And I got them when I was working on an Air Force base right next to the runway. Air Force bases are not subject to rules about pollution and stuff like that. I was afraid to light a cigarette at March Air Force Base near the runway because I could smell the kerosene in the air. Jet fuel, it's basically kerosene. But I first got these symptoms, kind of like asthma, while I was working there and breathing in those noxious fumes. And I improved tremendously when I quit working there. Well, I didn't quit. They closed March Air Force Base, and uh, hi Paul. They downsized it and um, picked out the various colleges that had campuses there. You see, the reason they allowed college campuses on the Air Force bases and naval bases and so forth was that in order to get promoted and become officers, the enlisted personnel needed to get college degrees. And that was in the time of all volunteer military, which it still is now. On the other hand, I hesitate to call it all volunteer because so many young men for so many decades have really had no other options than to either become a criminal or join the military. Now, when I was still in high school, there were jobs, for example, at gas stations. You pump people's gas, clean their windshields, offer to check the oil. None of that anymore. Gas stations don't even have service bays. I used to buy my tires at the gas station. Or if I had a flat, they'd repair it. Things are so different now. It isn't just the machines that replace people. There are services you can no longer get. Now, in Oregon, you are not allowed by law to pump your own gas, but the service station attendant is not allowed by law to check your oil. Go figure. And I was poor growing up. I always had an old clunker of a car, and I learned how to check the oil, make sure the tires had the proper pressure. I could even change the oil, change the spark plugs, empty the radiator and refill it. I never tried flushing it because with an old engine, if you flush the radiator, you take a chance on blowing out the freeze plugs, and then you have a major repair bill, or in my case, you junk it and look for another cheap clunker because it's cheaper than fixing the one you've got. And I was constantly had oil, coolant, and transmission fluid in the trunk. I often needed them. And it paid off one time when I had a fire extinguisher in the car. I had had a car catch fire while parked at a Denny's restaurant one time, wrecked the car. But so I always carried a fire extinguisher. Now, my car didn't catch fire, but there was a car off to the shoulder of the freeway that was on fire, the carburetor anyway. And this poor guy was trying to hit it with his jacket. He didn't want to just put his jacket there and have, ruin his jacket. So I pulled over behind him by good 20, 30 feet and walked up and handed him my fire extinguisher. Now, the gunk in the fire extinguisher, of course, will wreck your carburetor, but it's better than having your whole car burn to the ground. Anyway, yeah, I learned how to keep my own car running. I hated the Ford Maverick. Those things blew up worse than Pintos. But when that one got wrecked, it was hit in the front end. And I gotta say, the front end of the Ford Maverick was well made. This gigantic station wagon clipped my fender, spun out, and came back and hit the front of my car on one side and tore off the other fender. The roof of the Maverick came down and hit me on the head. I know that I didn't move because I had the seatbelt really tight and the shoulder strap. So I had a little bump on my head, but I walked away. The car's battery exploded, and of course the radiator was toast. It just burst open and dumped coolant all over the road. It was a mess. Well, then I got my Plymouth Duster. I miss that car so much. It was a slant six engine. It was very good on gas, and it was an automatic. The Ford Maverick I had was a three on the tree gear shift, uh, manual clutch and everything, and it kept breaking because this little 10-cent plastic grommet would pop out, and I'd have to drive home in first gear or second, whichever one I could jam it into. I'd lift the hood and move the thingies till it got into some gear or other. And when I bought those little plastic grommets at the Ford dealership so many times, they finally gave me a whole box of them because they didn't want to see me again. They charged 25 cents for the darn thing, you know. So anyway, I miss the Duster. And I still remember when I discovered that if I put new light bulbs in the headlights, I could drive much better at night. I thought my eyesight was going, and it was the darn headlights. Well, anyway, now that we're settled in, I've been musing about all this incredibly, it's just a power grab. Politicians who are not doctors are making medical decisions for the rest of us. And they want to make this COVID vaccine mandatory for everyone. I already don't take the flu shot, and I'm not anti vax. I got my DPT, and I plan to get my MMR, but I'm not taking the flu shot and I'm not taking the COVID shot. That's ridiculous. If you want to talk about herd immunity, the real thing comes when enough people in the population have had the actual disease. Why do you think the Black Plague would hit for a year or two and then go away for decades? Because everybody was immune to it, or enough people were immune to it that it didn't spread. Whether it was the smallpox or the bubonic plague or whatever it was. And those, by the way, were much more deadly than these viruses we're dealing with. And I've been laughing at people. All of a sudden, everybody wants to buy or rent houses up here on the mountain. We're rural and we're safer. We really have very little trouble with that virus around here. Well, I'm sorry, but if they come up here, they're bringing it with them. The same way the elites of the Middle Ages took their plague to the country when they fled. The fact is, cities are bad for your health, and if you can avoid living in a crowded city, by all means, avoid it. Archaeologists and anthropologists like to say that large scale farming made it possible to build large cities. I say it's the other way around. The construction of large cities made large scale farming, large scale agriculture necessary. Last night, Jimmy Church on Fade to Black had Dr. Robert Schock talking about Go Beckley Tepe. I still say Tepe, it's really Tepe. Gotta light this. It was built either at the end of or actually during the Ice Age. It's 12,000 years old. A huge monument, and they've barely dug up, maybe, according to Shock, about 2% of what's there. Stone pillars that have depictions of animals, and Shock says there's even writing. It's in a language we don't know. And about 12,000 years ago, whoever was there deliberately buried it with dirt. Maybe dirt and rocks, but definitely dirt. We don't know why it was built, who built it, why it was buried, who buried it. But we do know from our esteemed archaeologists and anthropologists that the people who lived there 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, were hunter-gatherers. They were not farmers. They did not have cities. And look what they did. It's a huge monument on what we call the Armenian Plateau, which it's in southeastern Turkey today. But that plateau runs almost from the Mediterranean to Persia. It's huge. And this monument fills a big part of it, whatever this monument is. So don't tell me that hunter-gatherers are primitive idiots who couldn't possibly build a stone monument. They did. It's there. And you could visit today. They've whoever's in charge has made it possible to visit. It is not a tourist attraction, but they have put in bathrooms. Uh, and they have a huge tent-like canopy over the part that has been excavated. And apparently these stone pillars are sitting on the bedrock in that part. There's nothing underneath them. They're sitting on bedrock. But there are places where there is older stuff underneath. I don't know how they know that. They either dug it up or did some kind of scanning. Well, anyway, don't live in a city if you can avoid it, especially in a high-rise apartment building where they recirculate the same air to everybody. Remember Legionnaire's disease? They caught it from the air conditioner. One person gets it, everybody else is exposed. And even then, people with good immune systems don't do that poorly. Now, my immune system is pretty good, but my major strength is that I heal quickly, which is a good thing because I'm always, I'm a little clumsy. I get bruises and small cuts. But for example, my grandfather had the smallpox. He had one pock on his forehead. Now, he had to be quarantined. That's what you really do in a situation like this. You quarantine sick people. But he said he was not particularly ill. The thing about smallpox, it's like chicken pox on steroids, the Godzilla of the pox. You get a fever, you itch, you want to scratch those blisters, but that just makes it worse. Now when I had shingles, which is really chicken pox returning. The doctor gave me chlortrimeton, chlorpheniramine maleate. It's an allergy med. It dried up my blisters in a day and stopped the itching. um, my mother had scarlet fever. She was like 2 years old. Of course, the whole family was quarantined, but nobody else was, just their house. My grandfather couldn't go to work. My grandmother couldn't go to work. She was a school teacher at the time. Mom was not that ill. She was running around the house, and Granny put a little harness on her with bells so she could hear it and know where her daughter was. Because Mom, at age 2, kept trying to go outside. You can't do that when you're quarantined. Now, she did have a high fever one night, and then the fever broke, and she was fine. I had scarlet fever. Let's see. I was in my 40s, probably 42. I'm a little hazy on dates in the 90s. It was crazy time. I thought I had the measles. I'd been around some kids and I heard that they got the measles, and I started having symptoms, a red rash, a bit of a fever, itching. And I was staying with my dad and his wife, so I just stayed in my room with bottled water and pink lemonade, lots of it. And because I didn't want to give it to them. One afternoon, I kind of lost track of time, but one afternoon, my fever spiked. I cried out so loud that I woke myself up, and that was when the fever broke. The thing about scarlet fever is not so much the fever as the congestion in your lungs, which is like a very bad flu. But after the fever broke, I still quarantined myself for a while, but I was fine. And I didn't eat anything the whole time. I just had water and lemonade for about 3 days. And then after the fever broke, I had some snacks that I snacked on. But basically, not a big deal. But that was when I found out it was actually scarlet fever. I looked at my tongue in the mirror and it was red, so I went, ugh, I better get diagnosed. Sure enough, it was scarlet fever, and that's what those children had. But nobody bothered to tell me till it was all over. Nobody shuts down young, healthy people. If you are immune compromised or your lungs are compromised, you know to quarantine yourself. And half the deaths, more than half actually, have been in nursing homes and prisons. Nobody took extreme measures to keep those people safe. Actually, the prisons are doing better than the nursing homes. You have a lot of people crowded into a small area. The healthcare workers should have been wearing masks and gloves in those nursing homes. The patients should have been provided with masks and allowed to decide whether to wear them. Some people can't breathe well in a mask. In fact, most people I know have complained. And if they're outside doing physical labor, they don't wear the mask. They can't. They can't work if they can't get enough oxygen into their lungs. I started to talk about Philip K. Dick, or I thought about talking about him. In 1971, he was an obscure writer of pulp fiction living in poverty in the low income area, not quite a slum, not quite a ghetto, in San Rafael, California. And he was harassed by the authorities. And if that can happen to a nobody, and I mean federal authorities, if that can happen to someone who's just, trying to pay his bills and see his daughter, stuff like that, it can happen to anyone. So when I hear people talk about how the government is spying on them, I don't automatically dismiss it. I've had experiences of my own, and for decades I dismissed my own experiences, thinking, oh, I imagined it or it was just a dream. And I found out that one big one really was real. I had this memory of seeing a big glowing red orb in the sky. Well, I was 6 years old at the time. I could place the date because it was the year my older and smarter brother got a telescope for his birthday, so it had to be August, and it had to be 1960. But I thought, no, that's crazy. I must have dreamed it or imagined it. Can't be a real memory. Until my older and smarter brother brought it up in conversation. I hadn't mentioned it, but I'd been wanting to. And there he brought it up. He saw it too. He said the local paper, the Culver City Star News, printed an article about it, that these orbs were seen all over the town. Well, that's interesting, but I have no way to get to the 1960 archives of the Star News. I don't think they're even in business anymore. I suppose someone in the right university could use that library to find them. But what I did come across was I think it was a blog post. It was a UFO thing anyway, a website where they um, published an image of a newspaper article about the Red Bluff Incident. Now, Red Bluff is miles and miles, hundreds of miles away from Culver City, but it was 1960, and two police officers saw glowing red orbs in the sky. And then ordinary citizens started reporting them. And the article said it was just one chapter of a book called UFOs over California. So I went to Amazon and got the book. Not sure where I put it this time. I rearranged my bookcase. Anytime I arrange things, I can't find anything. If things are just scattered in random boxes, I know where they are. Let's see. Oops. No, I don't see it. It must be back there. Anyway, one of the chapters is the Red Bluff Incident, and if you read the whole article, you find that Glowing red orbs and other shapes were seen in the skies from all the way down into Baja, California. Well, Culver City's kind of in between. It's closer to Baja. Sure enough, there really were glowing red orbs in the sky and other shapes, but the one I saw was an orb, a globe, a sphere, and it was coming down toward us in our backyard. The next thing I knew, heard Mom yelling at us to come inside, and she wouldn't let us tell her about it because we had taken so long to answer her when she called us. We thought we had responded as soon as she called. So there's some missing time there as well. Cat hair everywhere. Um, Mom was weird. Trust me, weird isn't a strong enough word to describe my mother. Anyway, it was real. So when I hear conspiracy theorists saying the government is after them, or men in black suits came and confiscated their files, or the government hacked into their computer, I don't automatically dismiss it. Hi, Oswald, aka Joseph. And then there's Phil's experience, which I didn't put together until quite recently. Why did he come to their attention and why were they after him? Why did they oppress him so terribly? There were a number of burglaries of his house, and the sheriffs refused to take it seriously. So Phil admitted that one time he and his girlfriend Stephanie faked a burglary trying to get the sheriff to take it seriously. But on November 17th, 1971, his house was invaded while he was not at home, and he couldn't get home because someone had sabotaged his car, and then someone else had lured him out of the house by asking to meet at a local coffee shop. All the doorknobs inside and out were knocked off of the doors, probably with a hammer. The big sliding glass door, which Phil sometimes called a picture window, was shattered. He hadn't even locked the door when he left. He figured there was no point, he had so many burglaries. Why not let them in so they don't have to break his windows? Explosives were used. All his food was dumped out on the kitchen floor. His manuscripts and bank records and tax records were all taken. One novel didn't survive. He was just starting to write it, and there were no other copies. Um, well, in January, I believe it was, Phil fled to Canada and did not return. It was either the end of December or the beginning of January. Let's see. If I can get a date on that. Oh, it was February 18 and 19. Interesting. So from November 17th to toward the end of February, Phil just kind of hunkered down in his house. Actually, he didn't. I take it back. I learned from Grania David, Grania Davis. I get the two names backwards. She had been married to Avram Davidson, and then they divorced and she married someone named Davis. I learned from her that Phil stayed with his friend Avram Davidson until he went to the convention in Vancouver. He also put his house up for sale. He didn't expect to get any money because he hadn't been able to make the mortgage payment. But the realtor agreed to store his possessions and send them to him when he had a place to stay. And she sold his house for him. And she mentioned in a letter that I actually saw that Nancy, Phil's ex wife, had come by a couple times to get her things. And Phil was pretty sure that Nancy took some of his things, but the way I see it, they were married. That's not stealing. She needed things. She had their daughter Isa. I had no problem with it. Phil was upset, of course. But anyway, yeah, his house was totally trashed. Well, he was not at home and couldn't get home because his car broke down. His car was sabotaged, and I just, part of the reason I never put it together was I thought, well, he wasn't well known at the time. He didn't have money or fame. Why would anybody target him? Well, maybe the local sheriffs thought he was a drug dealer because Nancy's younger brother Michael was staying with Phil, and his young friends used to hang around. And some of them were doing drugs, and Phil said that Michael was selling them drugs. So that might have aroused the sheriff's interest, but they probably wouldn't just break in and smash everything, throw his food on the floor. Well, they must have been looking for drugs, whoever they were. And the sheriffs probably would not be interested in the manuscripts of the novels he was writing. It's a small miracle that Flow My Tears, the policeman said, and Deus Erie survived. Phil was paranoid enough to give the carbon copy of Flow My Tears to his divorce attorney for safekeeping. And his co author, Roger Zelazny, had the manuscript of Deus Erie. A third novel that Phil was working on did not survive. They took the original and the carbon copy. Those were the good old days. You take two sheets of paper, put carbon paper in between, roll it into your typewriter, and type away, and it makes your original and a carbon copy. Many young people don't remember that. I still use carbon paper sometimes, but not all the time. The computer doesn't use carbon paper, and neither does the printer. So, anyway, meanwhile, there's all these rumors going around that Philip K. Dick has burned out his brains with drugs, can't write anymore. Well, he hadn't published in a while, but he was writing. Two novels and a third in progress. Well, okay, a novel and a half Roger Zelazny wrote half of Deus Irae. And when he felt a little more secure down in Fullerton in Orange County, Southern California, he began writing to fanzines and to Locus, the Cephala publication, Science Fiction Writers of America. I don't know if they're actually tied at the hip or any, what is it, joined at the hip, tied at the something. I don't know. I don't know if they're actually connected, but Locus publishes the Cephala goings on all the time. Anyway, he also began writing some short stories, and then he began working on his novel A Scanner Darkly. It was not the novel that got stolen in 1971. He never tried to write that one again. It probably would have been The Owl in Daylight, which morphed in the late 70s and early 80s into something to do with computers and getting lost in virtual reality. Anyway, he wrote A Scanner Darkly. He delivered Flow My Tears to Doubleday, his publisher. And then Roger Zelazny sent the completed manuscript of Deus Irae, so that got sent to Doubleday. Things were looking up, and he had some short stories going. His friend Ray Nelson, co-author of The Ganymede Takeover, wanted Phil to write a story for an anthology because Ray Nelson needed the money and he had promised the publisher that he would have a new story from Philip K. Dick. The problem was that Ray Nelson had chosen the topic. The publisher wanted to know what the story was about. So Ray told them it was about Mary Magdalene mourning the death of Jesus because he was her husband. Uh, kind of Gnostic, kind of out there, but Phil did not want to write it. He didn't believe that Jesus was married to anyone. So he just scribbled a note to, well, he wrote like one sentence and then scribbled a note that he couldn't write because his brains were burned out and sent that to Ray Nelson to get him off the hook. But Phil wrote a little something for us tempu knots and the pre-persons, which keeps getting glossed over because it's anti-abortion. He got jumped on by the feminazis for that one. How dare you suggest that we could have abortions up to the age of 6? And Phil had children licensed like pets, like dogs, and the pound would come and get unlicensed children. And if you didn't want your child anymore, you could send him to the pound, him or her. And they said that was ridiculous, but it's getting to be darn close to reality now. In some places, abortion is legal in the 9th month. That's the last month of pregnancy. Hi, Carolina. I'm looking at the chat room. Paul says in the northeast of England you can do anything you want during the pandemic. But parts of the UK are not so happy. Oh, Scotland and Wales are still in lockdown. That sucks. California was early to shut down and late to open up, and our county of San Bernardino is particularly slow. They're saying certain businesses can open for delivery and curbside service. Don't tell them that we've been doing that anyway, all along. Nobody told us we couldn't. We need to open up for people to come inside and browse at our small independent shops that usually have no employees, maybe one, but usually none. And it's just someone who lives here who's trying to make a living. Wrong, Oswald. The abortion clinics are wide open and going great guns. That's the one business that has not been shut down. It's considered essential. I can't get a cancer screening. I can't get my cataract surgery for my eyesight. I can't even renew my driver's license. They won't let me apply online and they won't let me make an appointment. And the local office isn't open anyway. But if I wanted an abortion, oh, come right in. I can't even see the dentist unless it's an emergency and I need a small adjustment to my dentures. I'm uncomfortable wearing them. They don't hurt, but it's a drag. They don't quite fit right. Can't do that. Pandemic, COVID-19. And we're not allowed to call it the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus because that's racist. Oh, I can see Chinese, yeah, but Wuhan, that's where it started. And China's blaming the US, saying that our military gave them the virus. Well, that might be true. Now, there's plenty of experts who say this was not an engineered virus. It's a natural virus. They didn't make it in a lab, but they were studying it in a lab, and it could have escaped from that lab, even though it is not genetically engineered. Woo woo virus, yeah. Okay, maybe it's worse than the flu, but it certainly is not polio, smallpox, or scarlet fever, or bubonic. And by the way, we get scattered cases of bubonic plague from time to time. Squirrels carry it without showing symptoms usually. Fortunately, these mountains are cold enough that the fleas cannot survive the winter. So there's no eggs to hatch out either in the spring. But tourists who bring their dogs up bring us fleas in the summer. Well, anyway, yeah, the stinking virus is not nearly as destructive as shutting down small businesses, and I suspect that might be the goal. Force everyone to either live on the government dole or work for a huge corporation and not have these pesky small businesses with entrepreneurs and independent minded people who stand on their own 2 feet and all that stuff. Oh, wow. New photo, Paul. Yeah, well, the motor vehicles people are the government. I got to turn off the heater. It's actually warm now, and I can't afford to keep running it. There we go. Hi, Tora. Hi, kitty cat. Hello. Now, if I ever get to 1,000 subscribers, I can do this podcast on my tablet and walk around and show you things like Tora Kitty, who's napping on her recliner chair, or the rose bushes outside, the trees. I have oak and cedar mostly, and an ancient apple tree that makes really tasty apples. I'm going to have to break down and write a letter to the motor vehicles. I tried writing my state representative, never got a response. Now, if your license expires in May, you get an extension, but mine expires in June and nothing's open. You're supposed to apply at least a month before the expiration date on your license. Well, I can't. Anyway, yeah, technocracy isn't half as bad as bureaucracy. People rise to their highest level of incompetence. I learned that in a class in public relations. It was called Interpersonal Communication in the Modern Business Organization. We called it BS class, and we said the whole words. But I'm on YouTube, so I won't say them. I don't cuss much. Usually it's after midnight, I'm alone, the computer's being a witch with a B, then I cuss. Yeah, I used to be able to stream on the phone or the tablet. This is some new rule. You can't do what do they call it? Like remote or something streaming until you have 1,000 subscribers. Well, I guess I'd get to do this for free. YouTube pays for tons of bandwidth, and I'm low on the totem pole. I think my membership is in the hundreds, 1 or 200, but we'll get there. Not a huge thing. I can always pre-record on the tablet and then upload it if I can figure out how. I think I can manage that. But I'm grateful to YouTube for the free platform, but I'm mm, kind of frustrated. Anyway, no more weekends till this madness is over because I just can't. It's not my internet. I thought it was, but I've tried really good, strong internet connections and still been bumped off on Saturdays and Sundays. It's YouTube. They're struggling to provide the bandwidth on the weekends, and I haven't had any problems today on Thursday. I do understand that some people have been wrongly bumped off or had their videos removed or restricted. But I really can't complain except that one weekend, long time ago now, month or two, when I was in the middle of a sentence and I got cut off because some idiot made a copyright claim against me. I when I was able to, I appealed to YouTube because I was just talking. No music, no video, just talking. And it took them 2 days, but they put my live stream back up as, of course, a replay. So it ends in an awkward moment, but okay. Uh, I'd sure like to know who did that, but I'll bet there's a black check mark on their account for making a false claim. I hope so. They wasted my time, they wasted YouTube's time for nothing. That's the definition of a troll. I've been on for over an hour, and not a whole lot in chat to respond to. Whenever I see Paul, though, I think of the old phrase "coals to Newcastle." Newcastle was a source of coal, so it's kind of like trying to sell ice to Eskimos if you take coal to Newcastle. Can't be done. And I highly recommend Johann Sebastian Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. It's literally horror movie music, especially the old movies where they didn't have tons of money to pay for an original score. They'd make great use of the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And if you search YouTube or whatever your favorite music platform is and start playing it, you will recognize it right away. If I've been watching or reading anything, sadly, and my brain hurts, I've been reading The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick. It's killing me. Well, not quite, but I was there when he wrote much of it. He didn't show me everything, but a great deal of it is quite familiar. But even this 900-page edited version really skips around and doesn't make coherent sense. I might have done a better job if I were so inclined, but boy. He had some 10,000 pages of notes. Some were single spaced typed, either notes or letters to friends and colleagues, but quite a few were handwritten, and his handwriting was atrocious, very difficult to read. I can read it. Sometimes it takes a while to um, decipher a scanned image of his handwriting, but I manage it. And there's a Zebrapedia website. There, Zebrapedia has a collection of scanned handwritten pages from the exegesis, and some very brave and hardworking people have deciphered many of those pages. I have found errors due primarily to Phil's poor handwriting. But now, and what I watch when I want a break from the exegesis is murder mysteries. Midsummer Murders, any Sherlock Holmes, or anything of Agatha Christie. Hercule Poirot. like him. I've seen them all before, but I don't mind watching them again. And I did watch Outbreak on Netflix. My sister put me on her family plan, so I get to watch Netflix. Well, Outbreak was so ridiculous that I actually laughed the whole thing. Hi, Tora. Say hi to the people. Say hi. Ah, see, there's your fan club. There they are. Yes, they're in the computer. Right. Oh, she's gotten big and heavy. Oh, are you purring for me? I think that purring means leave me alone, Mom. I'm busy. There, here you go, kid. Yeah, there's the bite of my cinnamon roll that she demanded but refuses to eat. Anyway, yeah, murder mysteries. An outbreak. It has what's his name? Was it Dustin? Not. Was it Dustin Hoffman? Let me see. First, I gotta do this. I gotta save the date of the Vancouver Science Fiction Convention. And then I gotta see, what was I looking up? Tora is a good kitty, but I'm positive she's a hybrid, a bobcat hybrid. All right, Outbreak, IMDb. If you type IMDb, you get the movie and not something else. 1995, yeah, Dustin Hoffman, Rene Russo, Morgan Freeman, and Kevin Spacey. Well, anyway, I watched Outbreak and it was so ridiculous I was laughing. People are at death's door and in 2 hours, the guy makes a vaccine from the monkey's blood. He injects it into the dying person who's bleeding out from Ebola, and in about 3 seconds, she's completely cured. So they can, live happily ever after because they're in love. They're married already, but she was going to get a divorce. I'm like, the science is ridiculous, but you know, the whole love story is twice as ridiculous and doesn't really belong there. Um, Another hokey movie I might watch again is Night of the Comet. 1970s. I forget who's in it. This comet comes near the Earth, and in its tail is some zombie virus. 1984. I thought it was the 70s. Never heard of these people anyway. It's a comedy. Good thing they weren't serious. Catherine Mary Stewart, Kelly Maroney, Robert Beltran, and Sharon Farrell. I don't know. But in one scene, the girl has this machine gun, little handheld type machine gun, and it jams. And she says, Daddy would have got me an Uzi. And then people who know what they're talking about told me that Uzis are crap. But it's a comedy. But it has zombies. This virus in the comet's tail turns people into zombies. And the zombies want to kill people. And you don't want to touch a zombie, you'll catch the virus and then you'll be a zombie. Kind of sounds like COVID-19. Except the deal is we all become zombies in our efforts to avoid catching the virus. Well, if somebody coughs on you, you'll catch whatever they've got. The common cold, the measles, COVID, the flu, whatever. So don't cough on people. I'll never forget when I was training for Meals on Wheels, a gal who did the same route took me around so I'd know where the houses were and so forth. Which ones to take dog treats to, which ones to take a can of cat food to. I got into the car and suddenly had a coughing fit, so I coughed into my elbow because I didn't want to cough into my hands and then serve food. This woman didn't understand. She was outraged that I didn't use my hands to cover the cough. It quite often happens to me. I'll walk into a room that's air conditioned, like the post office, or I'll get into a car that's had air conditioning running, and something I breathe in makes me cough. Oh, masks hide your whiskey breath from coworkers. Well, don't drink on the job, Oswald. I haven't had a drink since the stockade delivered a screwdriver along with my dinner, and that was back in early March, I think. You see, early, earlier than other states, and our county shut down harder than other counties. Anyway, I they were offering margaritas for $2, and I said, I detest. Uh, now I can come up with everything but the word peyote, mezcal. What is that awful, awful tequila? I don't even want to smell tequila. Can I get a screwdriver? Sure. They're much cheaper than margaritas anyway. But I couldn't believe it. I'd drunk about half of it and I couldn't. Good thing I was staying home and inside. I couldn't walk. Well, I kind of could walk, but I was afraid to. My legs wouldn't do what I told them. So I just sat in the chair with the radio on and waited for it to subside while I ate my dinner. It was really good food too, and already cooked and put together for me. Someday I'll actually manage to remember Taco Tuesday. They have $3 tacos, so you get two tacos for $6, and and a drink with them. This next time I'll ask for plain orange juice. Um, but it's really nice. Their tacos are big and good. I'll have to buy some sour cream. Even if I ask for sour cream, they never put on as much as I want. If I'm going to have sour cream or frosting or, any of those fattening foods, more is better. I need to gain weight. And I love sauces and dressings as long as they aren't too peppery hot or too full of vinegar. Oh, and I've discovered that I can't use Newman's Own honey mustard salad dressing. It's too heavy on the horseradish. It's a little heavy on the vinegar and very heavy on the horseradish. Well, I had a horseradish accident involving a baked potato when I mistook the horseradish for the sour cream. And ever since then, I really have an aversion to horseradish. So, anyway, I need to eat the rest of my cinnamon roll. That was an adventure in Amazon. I ordered a whole case of mixed cheese and fruit horns. You know, they're like a cinnamon roll with fruit in the middle or with a cheesy sweet pudding in the middle. It didn't arrive. It didn't come. It didn't arrive. It's been a month. So I messaged the seller, not Amazon, but one of those independent sellers on Amazon. Please refund or replace. Well, 2 days later, they delivered by priority mail their idea of a replacement, which was bear claws and honey buns. It wasn't what I ordered. And I didn't want it, but I don't see any way to send it back. They never communicated with me. And I had already, because they didn't reply to my email, oh, and it was more than 2 days later. But 2 days later, when they hadn't responded, I asked Amazon to refund my money. And 2 days after that, I received the product. It wasn't what I ordered. And it was more than a month late. And they didn't communicate with me. They should have asked me if it was okay to send something other than what I ordered. They still haven't communicated with me, but Amazon gave my money back and I donated the honey buns and bear claws to a local charity because I don't want them. But I do have this here cinnamon roll that I got at the local gas station mini mart, and it's pretty good. Homemade dressing, olive oil, apple cider vinegar, salt, pepper. Okay, you lost me at apple cider vinegar. I can't stand that stuff. It's supposed to cure everything, but even if I put a teaspoon in a gallon of water, I cannot drink it. There's something nasty about it. And I'm not that way so much with white vinegar, but the apple cider vinegar, ugh, nasty stuff. My homemade dressing is a little oil, a little vinegar, and fresh picked blackberries off my blackberry vine. I crush them so the juice is coming out and stir in the oil and vinegar. First the vinegar, then the oil. And if it's a little too tart, I might put in some sugar or honey. Wild blackberries tend to be kind of tart, but if you let them get super overripe, they're sweet. Anyway, or I just use my blackberry jam, homemade. I have the scratches on my arms to prove that I picked them myself. And turn it a teaspoon of that into some salad dressing with oil and vinegar. I do like the raspberry vinaigrette that, oh, I forget which brand makes it, but it's good stuff. But I'd rather make my own can when I have the blackberries. And I have the jam right now. I needed room in my freezer, so I pulled out all the blackberries that I froze last year when I had a bumper crop and made some jam. Jam is good for bribing or rewarding people who do stuff for me. I can't get them to take money. They won't hear of it. Of course, actual contractors and handymen will, but people who just bring me some groceries and say, "Oh," I say, "How much do I owe you?" "Oh, nothing." "Want some jam?" They love my homemade jam. It has a lot less sugar. You have to use a special pectin when you reduce the sugar, primarily for food safety. Also, so it will set up and gel and not be runny, but mainly to prevent things like mold and bacteria from growing in the jam. But the real secret ingredient is cinnamon. And some flavors will get a pinch of cloves. But I'm not telling you all my secrets. You might be the competition. Anyway, it's been an hour and a half. I need to recycle some coffee, and Tora wants to play with the pretty light. You know, the laser pointer. Yee. I better not do that. She might attack the computer. There she is. Ooh, yeah, she'll climb up the wall trying to get that thing. It's got your mousey. Okay, she's playing hard to get. Anyway, I'm going to sign off for now and thank you all for listening. Let's see. Keyboard. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back when the spirit moves and YouTube is willing. Catch you all later. Bye bye.